Let's talk herd. Hi, Amber. Thanks very much for coming on. It's
Hi,
lovely.
thank you
Hi.
for inviting me.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear what started you in your evolution. Like, were you always a little bit different and aware of the more holistic approach? I don't know how you would term what you do, or was it something that happened, over time, or was there a moment you can remember that changed your mind about things?
It definitely was an evolution. I 2000 and well, I've always had horses in my life, and I always wanted to be a horse trainer, and went through college and having my parents go, "Oh, horses are a really expensive hobby. You definitely need to make sure that you have
Mm,
money. So get a good job and go to school, and then you can, have your hobby." And
yeah.
so I tried to force myself through school, and it just finally was like, this isn't working. So I went out to Colorado for a year and spent some time with John and Josh Lyons. And so that
Wow.
was sort of my foundation of how to properly train a horse. Because prior to that, it was just me and my own horse, and he was really good. So I don't think that I really fully understood what it was like to have a horse that was challenging,
Mm,
or what to do with it, actually, because he was actually quite challenging on the trail. But we could go show and do regular stuff, and that was fine. But
yeah.
it was sort of just the foundation that got laid for that. And I trained for a long time. As soon as I got back from Colorado, I started bringing in horses, and I did that privately, and then went and worked for the San Jose Police Mounted Unit and trained their police horses and their officers for a few years. And
Oh, wow.
in doing that, yeah, it was interesting. I was introduced to something that we have called Eagala, which is it's more of the equine assisted, psychotherapy or team building. You can kind of use it for anything. And
Okay.
when I got certified in that, I just continued to say I worked as the equine specialist with a therapist, and I always would say, I feel like I want to do this, but in my own way. I don't want to do it this way.
Mm.
I don't like being boxed in.
Mm.
And so sort of just collected the pieces along the way. And I think what it was really, I didn't have the ability to connect with the clients as much in the horse training piece. I feel like I always knew
Okay.
it was the person that needed to shift a lot of the stuff.
Mm.
I could get a lot of good stuff done with the horses, but I knew as soon as I went back. And there was a lot of things that I didn't understand, where I would tell the person how to do it, when to do it, and they would for the most part, but it still wouldn't be the same.
Mm.
And I think it wasn't really until my divorce where I was sort of having my life um, fall apart a little
Mm.
bit. And what I realized, that my identity was very much tied into me being a good horse trainer.
Mm.
And when my own horses, sorry, my dog is in here breathing heavily. um, the connection with my own horses really started to fall apart,
Ah,
and
okay.
which actually was almost a bigger hit than my divorce, because I was like, oh
Mm.
great, now I am not a good enough wife. Oh, now I know I'm being a terrible mother because their entire lives are falling apart, and now also my own horses don't want to connect with
Wow.
me.
That's
So
tough.
I think you can definitely say that was sort of a rock bottom space for me. Lots of anxiety. I had started having a lot of health issues, and
Mm.
we had sold the property we were on, and I had moved to this new space. And stumbled upon, well, I just got kind of tired of feeling so worn down and so sick. And probably up until then, if you would have said healing, it was more, oh, yeah, you break your arm heals, you get a
Okay.
cut, and and then it goes
Yeah.
back together.
Yeah.
Not really understanding a deeper level of anything beyond that. And so I think that's the piece that really inspired me to start reaching beyond what I mean, I had gone to therapy and stuff for, with my ex and then with family and stuff prior to that. And I don't feel like that was something that really resonated with me. And I had stumbled upon an event where you walk on fire. And
Okay.
I think through that weekend is really where things shifted for me, because it just opened my eyes to like a million different things. And
Yeah.
I
Wow.
started to understand the energy behind why my horses were interacting with me that way. And then that's when it sort of started snowballing.
That's amazing. Yeah. So that weekend, what did you learn about yourself? Can you remember what shifted?
Yeah, they take you through a lot of different processes as far as, just looking back at what has created your identity, how much control you actually do have. It was a lot of me taking responsibility for my own part. I think up until then, I was really in a space of just a lot of victimness.
Yeah.
Why is this happening to me? Why does this always happen to me? Da, 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 and so really reclaiming a big piece of my own power, and understanding, probably not fully in this first weekend, but throughout the years, understanding like how big my piece in what my reality was, uh, what my piece was in all of it, instead of you know living from a place of this is all happening to me. It was like, what am I doing right now that is inviting the energy of this experience or this situation or this relationship or whatever it is? Where am I right now in this space that is inviting this in? And kind of just looking at what are the thoughts I'm thinking, where am I vibrationally, and really just calling back your own power and going, okay, well, I can shift this, or I can do some shadow work around this, or, having more tools around
Yeah.
that. So the weekend, I think, it probably opened my eyes to what was available, and that piece, but definitely over the last, 4 or 5, oh, I just looked at my Facebook, I guess 5, it's been a long time. 5 or 6 years since we've been here. So just along the way, just different events, meeting different coaches, different healers, different modalities, just evolving into like a bigger expanded, piece of awareness. And it is really about taking responsibility and then remembering that you are the one that has the power to shift all of this stuff. So while I know it's really hard for people when they are in it,
Yeah.
um, and it doesn't necessarily fit well with everyone in that moment, but usually always you can look back after things have passed through and go, okay, let's pull out the virtues, let's pull out what you did gain from this, because it did happen for a reason. No matter how horrible it may have felt at the time, there was learning in it for you. And I feel like if you can get the virtues and you can get the learnings from those situations, you don't have to necessarily redo those scenarios or those relationships. And if you do, there's most of the time a calling to go a little bit deeper within it. So I don't try to run or avoid the hard stuff. I just accept
Yeah.
it as part of being a human.
Yeah.
And there's just those bigger learnings that you get from those situations. And then also understanding that if I'm teaching it, if I'm holding space for people, that typically I'll get a really deep learning around it before I teach it. So I've learned to be very careful and then very aware before I go into a big teaching.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that analogy, or I don't know if maybe it's a metaphor for, when you're under pressure, that kind of brings out the diamond in you. Because it does seem like
Mhm.
most people who've made a big shift like that, they've had a really tough time that's just, it's just almost like an opportunity to grow, and you just expand into a new approach. Or so how would you say that altered what you actually do on the ground with horses, or riding?
I think it does continue to evolve. I think the biggest thing was me being able to hold my clients responsible and accountable. I
Right.
had a hard time with that because
Okay.
my tendency was to people please in relationships, and it definitely carried over into my client relationships.
Mm.
And even though I had done a coaching certificate, I'd done, a couple different modalities, it was interesting for me
Mm.
to make the shift of I'm absolutely not actually going to move beyond where you're ready for. And if you do choose to move beyond where you're ready for, I'm not, I'm just not going to appease people. So I'm pretty upfront, but it's always from a place of love
Mm.
and actually wanting the growth for them. Um,
Yeah.
but before I knew different ways where you could get around certain things with horses. I'd done it for most of my career,
Yeah.
and now it's more about, you know, going, is your horse actually ready to move beyond where you're at right now, and not being afraid of them being unhappy with what I'm providing.
Mm.
More of, I'm calling in the people that are ready to hear it, and if they're not, then I just release them
Yeah.
to a different coach or a different trainer. I really calling in soulmate clients where they're willing to
Mm.
dedicate that time and have the discipline around doing the work,
Yeah.
around what it takes to actually build and create that relationship where you can have all the performance goals met, but from a place that's sustainable because
Mm.
the tension in the horse's body isn't there, all those patterns that are holding them what looks like in a good frame or looks like what the person wants performance wise. Um, done from a place where you're shutting them down to get it versus doing
Mm.
it from a place of they're happy and willing to do it and understand what you're asking for is
Mm.
really what creates a different level of performance that you're going to get from them and the relationship piece too.
Mm. That's really interesting. So you're being you now, really. Like you're offering that without any sacrifice or um, alteration. Yeah. So have you found that you attract different people now?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, when I let go of that scarcity piece, the piece of, okay, if I shift this, I'm not going to have money. How am I going to pay rent? I'm a single mom. Like, how am I going to, do all these things if I'm not, because I could be very busy
Mm.
with
Yeah.
training horses and, doing clinics and doing what people think that they want. And I do feel like there is a shift. I do feel like, me collaborating with other trainers and body workers and clinics and stuff is helping spread the awareness piece of how many different ways you can achieve the goals you want. And, but yeah, having that support of other professionals stepping up and doing the same thing is really important. But in the beginning, it felt like, am I the only person doing this? And it wasn't in a good way. It was
Mm.
like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So I did actually have to stop taking horses in
Mm.
training and just sort of, I stopped my Facebook page. I stopped everything because I didn't know how to make the shift without
Okay.
completely moving away from what people knew. And I don't ever think anything that I did
Mm.
horse training wise was abusive or, you know, um, cruel in any way. I just feel like it's really aligned with what regular, traditional horsemanship teaches you to do. And, I don't think my horses were um, suffering. They all perform really well, but now I can look and see, oh,
Yeah.
there's so much tension being held in this spot, and
Mm.
from just slowing down and going a little bit deeper with everything, their
Yeah.
performance and their state of mind has shifted. So I feel like when people see, oh, you can have the performance piece and you can take into account, their nervous system, their body,
Mm.
all of the pieces together without it being this overcomplicated, thing that has to happen. They realize it's something that's
Mm.
achievable. And most people want that, and if you go back
Yeah.
to reminding people why they got into this, it's because they love horses. I don't know a lot of people that
Mm.
get into it. Um, to go win. It always typically starts
Yeah.
with, the love for the horse, and then maybe that shifts, but ultimately you can reach back into people's core essence around that. And it's, oh, of course I want a partnership. Now, unwind, the people that come in that aren't ready to do that or wanting to skip forward or that stuff is more important, then, I just release them and then they go where they go. And then I release
Mm.
responsibility of, that that place of where they're at, and everyone gets to be where they're at.
Yeah.
And I was definitely where I was at. So there's no judgment around it. It's just
Yeah.
not something that I'm willing to go out of integrity around if I'm working with people and their horses.
Mm. So, how would you say that you put it into practice? Like, if you have a new client, and do you go for, like, do you look at things on in a therapeutic way? So you're, say there's problems or issues already. How would you go about addressing them?
Um, so typically, if I have someone show up in person, I will work with the horse and just see where they're at. And while I'm working with the horse, whether it's on the line or in the round pen,
Mm.
I have the person on the side and I will ask them questions and I can simultaneously coach
Yeah.
them. The horse will really give me the information, and the person will give me definitely their
Mm.
story and their perspective on the situation. I'll listen for things that people are pointing out as problems. And I'll try to find that like dominant pattern through every story they tell me, whether it's, there's a lack of communication or I
Mm.
don't trust them, or,
Yeah.
there's usually a theme. And I'm pretty good at hearing the patterns in when people talk and what they say. And so when I'm listening to them, the first thing that I typically do with the horse is I go through the body and see, is there any place that they are holding that energy, whether it looks like tension or it's just energetically, or and checking in with where their nervous
Mm.
system is at and helping them reset the nervous system, helping them clear somatically just through their body, inviting expression. And
Mm.
during the round, I call them the round penning becomes kind of a confusing thing for some people sometimes when they hear me say, "Oh, you work in the round pen." And what it used to be for me was teach them to do inside turns, make sure they stop, make sure they go forward.
Mm.
Now, while that is a piece of it eventually, the beginning piece is more of just it's a space for expression.
Yeah.
And a lot of horses have been shut down or have been made to feel worried about that expression. So when I take them in there, I hold the space for them just in a really neutral, balanced
Okay.
place. And so when they're kicking out, if they kick out, or if they're rearing, or if they're, kicking at me or whatever,
Mm.
um, it's just I hold that neutrality where it's like you're not in trouble. You get to express, however you want to without consequence. And if there is no expression, then I same thing, I'll hold
Mm.
that space and then I'll do different things to
Yeah.
invite the expression to see if I can
Yeah.
get some of it to clear somatically with their own body and how their own body wants to clear it. And usually while I'm doing that, it brings up a lot of stuff for the human, and we
Mm.
sort of go into a little bit of shadow work with the
Yeah.
human, just sort of getting to any underlying like belief systems that are there, and seeing if we can shift those, or just getting more curious about those belief systems and,
Right.
how they could be affecting their perspective and their perception of their horse, and, what they think the horse is saying when versus what's actually going on for the horse. Because a lot of times it's the human's own story and lens that is,
Mm,
altering what's actually going on and clouding that up. And then their response to the horses, usually, if that's off, then obviously there's going to be a huge miscommunication between the two of them that
yeah,
will eventually just snowball and get bigger and more dangerous. And
yeah. Does that have a name, like a type of therapy? When you say you do somatic work, is that something you've developed yourself, or is it still quite close to the what you were mentioning before?
no, I mean, yeah, I feel like it's just a collection of things that I've learned over the years. There's no, I've learned from a lot of non-horse people, just diving into understanding the nervous system, understanding through my theta certification, understanding, the
Mm.
somatics of things, or as far as, sorry, I have to edit that out.
he's he's giving his
She always has a
opinion.
lot to say. Um, I always. Through the theta, understanding energetically what goes on, the belief systems, how to shift that for people. I think just my
Okay.
understanding of horses in general has just been from my experience with horses, and
Hmm.
I think I pull a
Yeah.
little bit of the coaching in, but not too much. And
Hmm.
yeah, there's not a real, I mean, the shadow work I've just learned from different coaches and, different people. So it's just a collection of mostly non-horse people. And then my own understanding of horses
Hmm.
kind of brought together. And I just pull out the
Yeah.
tools as I go, taking people into meditation, helping reset their nervous system, teaching them about co-regulation as far as with the horses. Um, so a lot of the somatic stuff I feel like just learned from like Peter Levine, reading different books, understanding the way the nervous system
Hmm.
works in mammals, the way that
Yeah.
that energy there or that emotion has been trapped in the body and what that actually means. Because I feel like for a long time I was like, "Ooh, energy trapped in the body," and it was like, "Oh," but when you can explain it to people from an actual biological viewpoint, they're like, "Oh, that's actually
Yeah.
a thing." It's like, yes, it's actually a thing. So feeling like I
Yeah.
needed to learn it at that
Yeah.
level so that when I was, teaching different people, if they were looking at me a little crooked, I could be like, okay, here, look, this is how mammals are. Most natural horsemanship
Yeah.
or horsemanship in general is really putting trauma into the horse's body unintentionally, but it's, the
Hmm.
methods, that's what we're
Yeah.
doing, and so once I understood
Yeah.
that, I kind of went, oh gosh, and so I'm always working from that place,
Hmm.
where's the nervous system and where's the person's nervous system, because that's directly going to affect, the horse. And I believe the somatic piece is like a lot about a lot of the missing link in a lot of different programs and understanding that. And
Hmm.
I just went through, and I understood it before, but I feel like I understood the importance of it at a deeper level when I went through the somatic breathwork training,
Hmm.
where you bring
Okay.
in the breathwork, but you're purposefully activating the sympathetic nervous system and then inviting people through movement and sound, to release once you bring it up. And then you bring their nervous system
Hmm.
back down into the parasympathetic on the second half of the session.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
realized this is what I've been doing with horses for the last few years. And I was like, oh, okay, I understand,
Hmm.
just recalibrating the nervous system. I think the way we train and the way we live, or and the way we're raised most of the time, our own knowledge of our body gets shut down by, our parents or our caretakers,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
us as trainers, because we were raised that way, do the same thing to horses, and it makes sense to us. But once you realize how stuck you've got in your own body and the body of the horses, you start to go,
Hmm.
okay, like, what are we concerned about expression? Well, why are we judging expression so much? Um, and why are we trying
Yeah.
to turn something that's perfectly created to release this stuff into something that looks quote unquote perfect, and in reality we're breaking what already works.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds really fascinating. Do you, how does it? actually is it a hands-on thing that you do with the horses, or is it more through some kind of pattern? Like, do you breathe with them, and or is it massage? Like, how is it actually transmitted?
It depends. Yeah, it depends. It depends on what the horse needs. I've worked as far as tools go, I have, really close friends that do different types of body work that I've learned a lot of stuff from,
Okay.
just several different modalities, several different ways. I smash them all together depending on what the horse looks
Mm,
like in front of me. Some horses are too defensive to touch, so just standing in their space,
mm,
seeing where their threshold is and going right into making them uncomfortable, and then just staying regulated in your own body, and letting them know that, oh, we're not
mm.
going to move past here, but also, we need to kind of look at what is making you uncomfortable and changing those neural pathways about their own
Okay.
story about what touch is or what sharing space with a human is. So sometimes it looks like standing
Mm,
next to them, sometimes it looks like putting hands on, sometimes it looks like actively helping the body release physically with with the groundwork.
yeah.
Um, so it's all of it.
Yeah. That reminds me a little bit when you were talking there of, with autistic children, sometimes they do this hug. I don't know what they call it, but it's like hugging them, like pressure, like holding them until they relax. Does it feel a bit like that to you, what you're saying with the horses who are uncomfortable?
Yeah, I feel like I can't speak to that piece, the human side as far as that goes, but I feel like, we just have different experiences in our life, them and us, and you know, a lot of that stuff is formulated before age 7. So our bodies are
Mm,
so amazing that it wants to save. Our minds, bodies are so amazing that it goes into that energy saving mode. So a lot
mm,
of this unconscious stuff, this I always say the body is the unconscious mind,
mm,
where you'll have automatic responses to certain things strictly from past experiences, whether they're trauma or just, things that have happened in patterns that your body remembers, and it knows, oh, this is how we respond chemically with
mm.
hormones to this experience or something that looks similar to it. So, if
Yeah,
that's something that's not serving you any longer, as far as those, where you get into those belief systems, if I have the belief that expression is not safe,
yeah, mm,
full
yeah,
expression, which is what happens for a lot of people. It makes you a burden. It gets you judged. It gets you isolated. It gets you rejected. If you have that belief system
mm,
going, anytime you feel like you really want to express something, whether it's verbally or physically, with movement or whatever, um, and that belief system will pop up, you'll suppress it, but those chemicals that say it's not safe to do that will also flush down. So if you're moving into a space of, I want to be fully expressed, I want to be fully empowered, I want to be able to say what I need to say, and I want to be able to
mm,
move how I, want to move when I want to move that way, you have to start getting and diving into that discomfort of,
mm,
when I speak up for myself, when I speak a boundary that feels unsafe to me, but is it? It's not, right? Your boundaries, are safety in relationship. And so, but when you first start doing that, it's uncomfortable. So I feel like for the
yeah,
horses who have been shut down, who have been saddled really fast or brushed really roughly or
mm,
mishandled and actually been in traumatic
yeah,
situations,
yeah,
when you start to move towards them, their body has a story. This is unsafe. I'm going to get defensive. And so I step into that space where they first tell me this is unsafe, and I stand there and I wait and I stay regulated and help their system co regulate.
yeah,
Um, and so the new neural pathways will start to, oh, wait a minute. This is something that I thought I needed to respond to, but actually, this is different. Um, it takes a long time sometimes, and I feel like where people get hung up is, they start to go into their head and they start to, why is this taking so long? And
yeah,
they'll invite resistance into
mm,
the situation, all from just, being uncertain or, questioning what they're doing, or is this working, and that will
yeah,
slow the entire process down. Um, so I feel like I do a lot of that for them. And while I'm doing it, I bring the person in and talk to them about how they're feeling so that they're not maybe directly
Yeah.
affecting the horse, but we can work through some of that stuff simultaneously, um, while I'm helping the horse work its stuff out, helping the person work their stuff out about the horse's stuff. And it's almost like couples therapy.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it feels very similar to the way that I've kind of um, discovered or just become to work with those things in horses. Like, and I always think of it as you're kind of merging boundaries in a way because you're supporting their boundary or like almost coming up against it and but then waiting until it softens and relaxes and it's yeah it's really powerful with horses, I feel.
Yeah, and I feel like humans as just a species don't get taught the value of that when they're growing up. So when you start to do it in this way, it kind of confuses them. Like,
Mm,
what are we doing? We're not doing anything. We're just standing here. It's like,
yeah,
you're being, you're a human being. We're actually made for this.
yeah,
So get back to
yeah,
it.
yeah. It makes me wonder if there's a way of doing that with people, like a similar kind of, I mean, maybe there is some kind of therapy like that. I don't know. Because recently I've been focusing more on the relationship between, I suppose that sounds like what you do has that effect anyway with people. And maybe they also pick up their horses' response to it as well.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different ways to do this, and different coaches and trainers and people in different modalities all have their own medicine to bring forward, and I think it's just really either it's the person watching, the process and them drawing the parallels to their own life and their own situations. A lot of times you can get deeper with people because their defenses go down if they're talking about their horse. And
Mm,
I pull a lot of information about how they feel about themselves in their own situations by them talking about their horse. So I can sort of,
yeah,
work from that angle. But I know there's so many different ways to do it. And it's really just about stripping you back down and giving permission to people and horses to be who they really are, um, without judgment of self, and creating a space where they're not judged
mm,
for anything that they've done in the process of getting to where they're
yeah,
at. The
yeah,
master class that I hold is all online, so I don't actually see those people in person, and I don't see their horses. But the process I take them through
okay,
in the beginning, you know, um, it really is what does the unwinding. And I support them for sure in the call, but a lot of it is just starting to really become aware of your own patterns and your own stories. And then you have, your answers. And so what I try to make sure I'm doing for everyone is creating a space where there's a little bit of a guideline that they can follow, but really it's not about me telling, the people this is the problem. It's about you discovering where that lesson is.
mm,
And so I can sometimes, I mean, I can see stuff where I go, oh, if you went here, you would really be able to unravel quite a bit. But I think it's much more empowering for
yeah,
people to get there on their own. And so I've learned to just sort of lean back in those situations sometimes. I mean, sometimes I will, throw the breadcrumbs. Um, but a lot of times I've learned to just lean back and let people go through the process themselves, even if it's really uncomfortable for them. Because I,
mm,
can look back
yeah,
and realize in the most uncomfortable moments of my life, I did have support, but the coaches and the people that I worked with always just let me come to that space on my own. Um, and then I found that I didn't have to
yeah.
relearn those lessons.